Well, after undergoing ankle surgery, LSU wide receiver Kayshon Boutte has officially been cleared to be 100% in this, which is great news. But why is the timing so important? Why is it so important that he's back right now? We'll break into that on today's edition, plus so much more on today's edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So Spotify, Amazon Music, whatever you like. You can listen there, and you can also watch on YouTube as well. You can find us on YouTube at Locked on LSU. So today's episode of Locked on LSU is brought to you by Rock Auto. They've got amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. To visit rockauto.com and tell them that Locked On sent you. Well, Kayshon Boutte is back, is being medically cleared to be 100% in practice. So he was out about half of the season last year. The Kentucky game 6 was the last game that he played in 2021. So he was out about half of last year, undergoing ankle surgery, had an ankle injury in that Kentucky game, underwent ankle surgery, and he's been out since then. And Kayshon Boutte has emerged as not just LSU's top wide receiver, but I think the rest of the country is looking at Kayshon Boutte as well as being one of the top receivers in college football this year. And we'll get into that more at the end of the podcast. But Kayshon Boutte in about 6 games had about 508 yards. So you're looking about halfway of the season. So he was on his way to be 1,000-yard receiver. And Kayshon Boutte is absolutely a force. But he's back to 100%. He's been cleared for full speed ahead in spring and summer practices and training camp. But why is it important right now? There's a few reasons that I want to get into. And I think first and foremost, the most important reason why it's important right now, the news was released earlier this week, but in June, why is it important that Kayshon Boutte can be 100%? The biggest, most glaring, most obvious reason to me, in my mind, is to be able to get those reps with the quarterbacks. Because we don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback of LSU this year. And Kayshon Boutte, it's been a minute since he's gotten reps with both Myles Brennan and Garrett Nussmeier. He's never taken snaps with Jayden Daniels before. But, October 2020, whenever Myles Brennan was hurt, that was the last time Kayshon Boutte got in-game reps with him. Nuss was in the Central Michigan game, and that was really the last time that they got in-game reps. And, of course, they got reps in spring camp and in the summertime going into the 2021 season. Nuss had that big-time game against Arkansas, but that was, Kayshon Boutte was hurt by then. He wasn't playing in that game. So it's been a minute, a year to 2 years since he's been able to take in-game reps or even just practice reps with both Myles Brennan and Garrett Nussmeier. So that's huge, to be able to get back on the field, get reacclimated with those quarterbacks that he's at least familiar with, and at least familiarizing himself with Jayden Daniels. This is a guy that they've never even thrown together. So that's important to be able to get reps with them. I think it's also important for the coaching staff as well for a few different reasons. How many times has Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock just harped on the fact that they don't want to define an offensive scheme until they realize what talent that they have? I think that's important. How can they know what talent they have, how they want to operate in this offense, if they don't know what the top wide receiver on the team looks like? And I'm making an assumption that will be Kayshon Boutte, and I believe that's a fairly fair assumption. Of course, Trey Jenkins had a big season stepping in whenever Kayshon Boutte went down with an injury. Of course, Jack Bech transitioning into a full-time wide receiver role. They're going to be key contributors to this team as well. But I look at what Kayshon Boutte has done in the past, and I look at him to be wide receiver 1. So that's important for this coaching staff to have enough time to see Kayshon Boutte on the field and say, okay, here are his strengths, here are his weaknesses, here is how he's able to kind of shove off defenders. This is what he's struggling with. So being able to see Kayshon Boutte on the field is invaluable. But I also think it's important for the coaching staff to look at Kayshon Boutte and how he plays with the quarterbacks options that this team has. Does he just have, undeniable chemistry with Myles Brennan? Are they able to build upon the chemistry that had already been built in the 2020 season? Is that camaraderie there with Garrett Nussmeier? They've also taken stats together. Or is that familiarity going to come back and build upon each other? Maybe that makes this coaching staff's job easier in picking who will be the starting quarterback. Or maybe it's just an undeniable connection with Jayden Daniels, that they are just doing long balls all day, and they just click together. I don't know. But the quarterback position is a question mark. Kayshon Boutte playing the wide receiver 1 role is not a question mark. So using the tools that you have, using the weapons that you have with, being Kayshon Boutte with the revolving door at quarterback, I think is going to be maybe not ultimately the deciding factor, but absolutely will be a factor in who is playing under center this year. The chemistry between wide receiver and quarterback is so incredibly important. So I think that plays a big role here. But I think overall, just having a veteran presence on the field is also invaluable. Of course, Kayshon Boutte could be there when he was injured and he wasn't 100%, but having a veteran like Kayshon Boutte out there in practice, a guy who's been there before, a guy who's been with LSU, and a guy who also kind of looked around at possibilities of where the transfer portal could take him, where NIL deals could potentially take him. Of course, ultimately he ended back at LSU, but I think having that mentality of I'm going to search through my options and realizing that LSU is my best option, I think is invaluable. That veteran presence, the guys who have been there before, that really is important within a locker room. It's important for camaraderie. It's important for establishing culture. And I think a lot of those are buzzwords that get thrown around within sports media. How important is that? I think with a new coaching staff, and I think with so many young players or new players coming in through the transfer portal, that's important to establish up front. That's important to establish right now. So while Kayshon Boutte can play a leadership role from the sidelines, it just brings it to the next level. Whenever he's able to get there on the field, he's doing the same drills, he's going through the same reps as some of these lower level wide receivers or even just offensive players in general. He's able to get reps with some of these transfer defensive backs, these transfer corners that are coming in that haven't had as much experience with high-level wide receivers. So even just going up against these DBs in practice, I think brings invaluable value, for lack of a better word, to the team. Veteran presence, being able to go up against each other in practice, and just being able to be a leader within the locker room and on the field, I think is huge. And also, the most important thing, absolutely, is getting reps with these quarterbacks. Because while we can talk about culture all day long, the intangibles, we can talk about that all day long. The most important thing is who does he gel with in terms of quarterbacks in practice? How are the quarterbacks looking with him? Who is, targeting him the most? Who is his favorite pass catcher? I think is one very important element to this as well. But what exactly are our expectations for Kayshon Boutte? What will LSU need him to be? I want to get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell y'all about BetOnline, because it is your number one source for all of your sports betting stats and sports information. They've got all the latest sports development. They've got news and odds, and including, they had this year's basketball championship matchup last night. The Golden State Warriors took it all. Got to label it a dynasty after that one. They've got the Stanley Cup finals, they've got Major League Baseball, and of course they've got fighting news, they've got MMA and UFC, and they've also got boxing. So whatever you need, whatever you want to put money on, whatever you need to learn a little bit more about, BetOnline has got you covered. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And we also have a very important favor to ask you. We put together a survey so we can learn more about listeners like you and make your favorite Locked On podcasts even better. This is your opportunity to tell us what you like and what you don't like about Locked On podcasts. We're here to serve you. So go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey right now to get started. It will not take very long, so no worries. And everyone that completes a survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. So if you're looking at games to go to this year, then Locked On could have you covered with some cash to cover those tickets. To take our audience survey, go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey. Thank you for your help. So what does Kayshon Boutte necessarily need to be? What are the expectations for Kayshon Boutte coming into this season? I think a good bit of that kind of lies in what does this coaching staff see in him? How do they want to utilize him? Of course, in the past 2 seasons, we've seen what Kayshon Boutte can do. I mean, biggest game of an LSU receiver in history, the 308-yard game against Ole Miss. And of course, he kind of looked coming into form in that first half of last season. Obviously, was Max Johnson's favorite target to begin the season. But how does this coaching staff view him? Brian Kelly was on Jacques Talk. Jacques Doucet of WAFB Sports was on the show with Jacques, and he kind of broke down what he saw, Brian Kelly, what he saw in Kayshon Boutte, not only as a leader, as an emerging leader, and also as a player as well. This was Brian Kelly on Jacques Talk with Jacques Doucet.
I was proud of him. I really was, because some would take it the other way and say, you know, I'm not going to do this. But, you know, by the end of the spring, he was coaching our younger players. He was doing the little things the right way. He's been in the training room. He wasn't earlier. All I know is that he's doing the little things necessary for himself and our team that's going to put him in a good position later.
Again, that was Brian Kelly on Jacques Talk with Jacques Doucet talking about Kayshon Boutte and kind of his return back. And this is a new coaching staff. I talk a lot about how this coaching staff has no loyalty in terms of the quarterback position. So they have no loyalty to Myles Brennan, him being in his 6th year at LSU. This coaching staff doesn't feel the need to go to Myles Brennan just out of respect or loyalty. Same thing with Garrett Nussmeier. They don't feel the need to, be loyal to the guys who started here from the beginning. But I think that also goes with Kayshon Boutte as well. He's an incredibly talented wide receiver, and any coaching staff would be just salivating at the mouth to be able to have him on their team. But they could look at Kayshon Boutte coming off of an injury and also kind of looking around at other NIL deals, looking around the transfer portal and say, we don't feel the need to give him these reps to be able to, or to, make him a leader on this team. We feel no need to do that. But I think what Brian Kelly just said right there completely squashed any thought that you might have that this coaching staff wouldn't feel loyal to him, because he continues to do the things that he needs to do to be a leader, doing those little things, stepping up in practice, kind of acting like a coach. Those things are so important. I think about a story that Charles Barkley told one time about how he entered the league and he was almost 300 pounds. And the coaching staffs would tell him what he needed to do, would tell him the exercise routines, his diet plan, would continue to harp on his weight. And it wasn't until a teammate of Charles Barkley came up to him and said, dude, you cannot play in the NBA at 300 pounds. We're going to do it together. We'll work out together. We'll figure out what we need to do to best serve you so you can best serve this team. And that's kind of how I view Kayshon Boutte's role here. Is you can hear things from the coaches all day long, but it's not until a fellow teammate steps up and says, this is what you need. This is what I need from you. This is what the team needs from you. So hearing that Kayshon Boutte has kind of stepped up and really been kind of a coach on the field, has been able to step back and look at these younger wide receivers and say, okay, this is what you need to work on. Here's your mechanics. Here's your footwork that you need to work on. I think that's incredibly important for Kayshon Boutte to play that coaching role, because like I said, I mean, it's not as, it doesn't have as much weight when a coach tells you rather than when a teammate tells you. So that's an important role that Kayshon Boutte has been playing, doing the little things and really emerging as a leader, I think is incredibly important for this team. But what will LSU need Kayshon Boutte to be? We can break down some of the numbers from last year. I look at Max Johnson's season last year, and I kind of see it being a tale of two halves. I look at the first half of the season against UCLA, 330 yards, McNeese, 162, Central Michigan, 372, 280 against Mississippi State, 325 against Auburn, 261 against Kentucky. I mean, Max Johnson was putting up big time yards now. I mean, he had 3 games above 300 yards, and it was, a very pass happy type of offense. I mean, 46 passing attempts against UCLA, 35 against Central Michigan, 46 against Auburn, 38 against Kentucky. I mean, he was throwing the ball now, and he was slinging it downfield against high-level opponents in UCLA and Mississippi State and Auburn and Kentucky. And then I look at the latter half of the season, and you can make the argument that there were, there were more cupcakes in the beginning of the season versus the last half of the season. But I see his yards start to decline after Kayshon Boutte gets hurt. Look at 133 yards against Florida, 146 yards against Ole Miss, 160 against Alabama, and of course only had 21 yards against Arkansas. That's where Garrett Nussmeier came in and played a majority of the snaps. And then you start to see 319 and 306 against ULM and Texas A&M respectively. But I see that 4-game stretch where Max Johnson really started to struggle after Kayshon Boutte got hurt. Throwing the ball as many yards. I mean, the number of passing attempts really didn't go down significantly. You can see 46, 27, 35, 27, 46, 38 passing attempts in that first half. In the second half, you see 24, 21, 32. Of course, the Arkansas game is an outlier with only 6 passing attempts, 33, 38. So while the passing attempts didn't go down significantly, you can see a trend where it started to go down, but the yardage is really what stands out to me, that Max Johnson just wasn't putting up the same numbers after Kayshon Boutte got hurt rather than the first half of the season. Like I mentioned, there's a couple things at play here. You're playing against Central Michigan in the first half of the season. You're playing against Alabama and Texas A&M in the latter half, but still, I mean, there's a ULM game thrown out in there. So of course your opponents are more difficult in the second half of the season, but Max Johnson still balled out against Auburn and Kentucky and UCLA, pretty difficult teams to play against, high-level opponents. So I see an obvious change in production from Max Johnson in the first half of the season with Kayshon Boutte and in the second half of the season. Now, of course, Max Johnson's not going to be under center this year. This could be completely different. The connection that Max Johnson and Kayshon Boutte had could be different than the connection that he has with any of these 3 or 4 quarterbacks that are currently competing for the starting role. Of course, if you want to say Walker Howard is competing for it or not. But if you can look at this sample size and just say, okay, the quarterback's job got significantly more difficult without Kayshon Boutte in the mix. I think that's going to be the number one thing that LSU needs from Kayshon Boutte, is to make the quarterback's job significantly easier, is to be that number one guy, is to be the go-to, because, we've all heard Joe Burrow, F it, Jamar's down there somewhere. I think that's going to be a similar role that Kayshon Boutte can play, is when the quarterback, whoever that might be, is getting pressured under center, you can say, F it, Kayshon Boutte is down there somewhere. I think that's the biggest role that Kayshon Boutte can play. And really what this LSU team needs of him is to make the quarterback's job easier. And like I said, he was on his way to 1,000-yard season last year. If he would have stayed in throughout the regular season, throughout the rest of the season, what would he have done? I think that's a question that we can all ask ourselves, and something that we're looking forward to seeing this year. But also, what is Kayshon Boutte's ceiling? What are fair expectations for Kayshon Boutte? Because I've seen a lot of comparisons to really big-time names. Are those fair expectations? Are those fair comparisons for Kayshon Boutte? I want to get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Rock Auto, because there are so many different makes and models and years of cars out there. It's impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock parts that you might need. I always ask you very intimidating questioning, like, is your Honda Odyssey an LX or an EX? Like, I have no idea if that means. I always waiting at chain auto parts stores, waiting for the parts to be delivered, or waiting for the person behind the counter to call and order those parts. It's a waste of time, and it's also a waste of money. So why do that when your phone or your computer has access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket? So you can save time and you can save money with using Rock Auto, because Rock Auto's prices can be 30%, 50%, even 100% more expensive at the chain auto parts store than it is at Rock Auto. For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is like $350 from a chain store and only $216 from Rock Auto. So why throw away money when you can get the cheapest alternative at Rock Auto? Plus, it's a family business, and they've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. I know I always love to support family businesses and small businesses. And if you do too, then Rock Auto is the place. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. We've got an amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Thanks for making Locked On LSU your first to listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to tune in next week. We'll have another recruit of the week. This week was Dante Moore, breaking down some of the top quarterback names in the country. We'll get some more recruits next week as well. But now I want to focus on the guys who are going to be on the field for LSU this year. And Kayshon Boutte is the biggest name that's been talked about around these LSU football parts because he has been cleared 100% to be practicing after his ankle surgery. So that begs the question, what exactly are fair expectations for Kayshon Boutte? Because Jack Bech stepped up big time last year whenever Kayshon Boutte went down with an injury. Jayden Daniels, of course, stepped up as well. He's coming back for his fifth year. He had that big game against Texas A&M last year. Down the line, there are really impressive and really solid wide receivers. And that's why I'm really excited this year to see what can Jayden Daniels and Jack Bech and Kayshon Boutte and anyone else who can win a starting wide receiver job, what will this team look like with all three of them combined? Of course, with Jack Bech playing more of a consistent wide receiver role rather than a true tight end role that he was playing last year. But what are the expectations? I think this is really difficult to put kind of a numerical expectation on Kayshon Boutte because a 1,000-yard season would be great. A 1,000-yard season would indicate, he was a playmaker and he was able to contribute big time for LSU. I think that's a pretty solid landmark and something that's very attainable for Kayshon Boutte. But I'm not going to ultimately call it a failure of a season if Kayshon Boutte gets 850 yards, for example, and there are more target shares because that is just how stacked, how talented, and how deep this wide receiver room is, that if you're having, several 800, 900-yard wide receivers, then you're doing a pretty damn good job. So while a 1,000-yard season goal expectation for Kayshon Boutte, I think, is fair and attainable, it's not the end goal. I think looking at Kayshon Boutte and expecting him to be an All-American or All-SEC, have those kinds of numbers, I think that would be great. And I think that's also a fair expectation and fairly attainable because I think that we can have these conversations about who is the best wide receiver in college football. And I think Kayshon Boutte, that name is going to be in the mix. I think you have a very fair argument to say that. So all SEC, All-American honors, I think would be fair expectations. But again, if Kayshon Boutte plays a big-time role and LSU is able to win 9 or 10 games, fingers freaking crossed, and Kayshon Boutte isn't named an All-American, then that's okay because this team is still winning the games that they need to win, and Kayshon Boutte is a part of a production of that, but just isn't necessarily recognized nationally, and that's okay. At the end of the day, wins are all that matters, not individual awards. I think for me, and I'll go back to Kayshon Boutte's expectations for himself. He said, personally, my goals for this season, I'd say 1,200 receiving yards, 18 touchdowns, and the Biletnikoff. I mean, that'd be great. I think that those are also realistic expectations for Kayshon Boutte. 1,200-yard season would be stellar, but that's not out of question. 18 touchdowns would be huge. Give us a better gauge for how we can really set our expectations for this LSU team as a whole. If Kayshon Boutte is setting that expectation for himself, 1,200 yards and 18 touchdowns, then we can go from there in setting our expectations. Biletnikoff would be huge. That would be great. I mean, Jamar Chase won the Biletnikoff, and he also was Offensive Rookie of the Year. So that's a huge indication of how good you can be for this team and how good you are in general. So yeah, I mean, those would be great expectations. But I'll go back to my expectations for Kayshon Boutte. I think you can kind of allude to it, but my biggest expectations is just be a stronger, more physical, and even more sticky-handed receiver than you were last year. Kayshon Boutte, I mean, he uses his size. He's able to kind of shove off defenders. That's what makes a good player. That's what makes a good receiver. The good receivers are going to get double teamed, but the best receivers can still get catches, can still get targeted even when double teamed. And I think Kayshon Boutte is very good at that. Not just because he's a good receiver, but because he's a big body receiver and is able to shove off some of these smaller DBs. So I think that's a big part of this as well. But numbers aside, individual awards aside, Kayshon Boutte needs to be a force for this team. And that's my expectation. I'll say 1,000 yards just to put, for all of you number-based people out there, I'll put 1,000 yards out there. That can be a fair expectation. But at the end of the season, if Kayshon Boutte doesn't hit that mark, but LSU is still winning 10 games and going to a Year 6 bowl, I'm not going to be disappointed. So I think that my biggest goal for Kayshon Boutte is do what you did last year, but on another level. And most of all, stay healthy. in football, in sports, in life, your best ability is your availability. So we can talk all day long about how we think Kayshon Boutte has an argument for the best receiver in college football. And I want to go over that next week as well. Can he be that? I think he absolutely can campaign for it. But all of those talks don't matter if you can't stay on the field. So those are my biggest expectations. Build upon what you did last year and stay healthy. Those are the absolute most important things for me in terms of Kayshon Boutte and what he can be for this team. My expectations for him, stay on the field and build upon what you did last year. But that's going to do it for me today. I appreciate y'all for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, make sure to tune into the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made. So search now for Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. You'll get over 50 insiders. You've got the Odyssey sports experts. You've got the draft experts of Locked On NBA Big Board. You've got a bunch of insiders on that Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. So the top 5 episode of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. Make that podcast your second listen of the day.